Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. In our study of this Shvetashvatara Upanishad, an extremely ancient text on yoga, one could even say Hatha Yoga, even though the word Hatha Yoga came into existence quite later, maybe only in the 9th or 10th century. But since this text, as I explained in my previous sessions, talks about asanas, it talks about pranayama, it talks about the ideal places to practice yoga. Then, as we were discussing its teachings, the quintessence of the 6 chapters, while we discussed the quintessence of the 3rd and the 4th chapter in the previous class, I also pointed out that this is, amongst all the available extant works, the most ancient work that clearly mentions a personal deity named Shiva or Rudra. Even though Rudra has been mentioned in many earlier sections also, as I explained, it is mostly in the context of the fire as a symbol to the supreme divinity. Here it is very clearly mentioned as a supreme deity. This was the discussion that we were having in our previous session. Shiva specifically has been mentioned here very prominently, and that's why we also had some discussion about the concept of Shiva in the earlier Upanishadic texts, in Buddhism and in Jainism, in the yogic traditions of Buddhism, Jainism, and earlier Vedantic texts. This, of course, doesn't mean that I'm saying that the worship of Shiva started only in the 3rd century BC, when this text was composed in the present form as it is available to us now, 2,300 years ago. The worship of Shiva goes back into extreme antiquity. Many scholars have interpreted some seals found from Mohenjo-daro during the Harappan or the Indus Valley, Indo-Saraswati Valley civilization, which is the most ancient civilization. Many seals have been interpreted as depicting Lord Shiva in a meditative posture, sitting like this. It's controversial. Some archaeologists don't agree, but some state this. In any case, from extreme antiquity, the worship of Lord Shiva has been there, whether it is Lord Rama, the seventh incarnation, who is now widely worshipped himself in India. He himself was a devotee and a worshipper of Lord Shiva, as can be seen from the famous temple of Rameshwaram in South India, in Tamil Nadu, which he himself founded before going to Sri Lanka to acquire victory over King Ravana of Sri Lanka, the embodiment of evil in this famous story of Ramayana. Nonetheless, even Ravana himself was a devotee of Lord Shiva, as is clear that he had performed earlier austerity. He was a great person, he was a great scholar of the Vedas, but sometimes scholarship also goes wrong, and that's scholarship going wrong in the case of Ravana. And he was a great devotee of Lord Shiva. He had performed tremendous austerity in Mount Kailas, which is now in the Tibetan territory, a very holy, sacred place for the worshippers of Lord Shiva. Even Krishna, at least the Krishna of the Mahabharata, is a worshipper of Lord Shiva. According to the stories found in Mahabharata, Krishna went to the present place known as Badrinath, which is 200 kilometers further up, 300 kilometers further up, a very sacred place of India, where he performed austerity and meditated for, I think, 5 years on Shiva and had the vision of Shiva. He had a master who was a Shaiva. So, and I think that's why it's not an exaggeration to state that Lord Shiva is the most influential and the most widely worshipped deity in India. And when it comes to Indian traditions as they exist out of India, I think it's just always Lord Shiva. Whether it is, for example, the Balamon Cham, the Cham Hindus of Vietnam, they are all Shiva worshippers. Whether it is the Balinese Hindus from Bali, the famous beautiful island of Bali, they are completely worshippers of Lord Shiva. Or even if we would consider Nepal as it is now out of India, then Nepal too is deeply influenced by Shiva worship, as is clear from the famous Pashupatinath temple in Kathmandu. And even beyond this region, from extreme antiquity, there are signs of Shiva being worshipped. I remember seeing a very beautiful painting, I think from the 7th century. So it's an extremely ancient painting from Khotan, which is now, I don't know how you pronounce it correctly in Chinese, Xinjiang? Xinjiang province. Yes, from Xinjiang province. Okay, your hometown. I was told that this painting is from there, and on one side it has clearly Lord Shiva with all his snakes on it. On the back side of it is another Iranian deity, pre-Islamic Iranian deity, Rustam, who was widely worshipped in Iran before Islam came to Iran. So like this, I remember when I was exploring this, then even in areas that are now Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan. In these regions also there are many ancient signs of Shiva being worshipped. And of course, if you go to Southeast Asia, then I think the most beautiful archaeological site of Malaysia, the Lembah Bujang, the Bujang Valley, is filled with temples dedicated to Lord Shiva. Vietnam is filled with temples dedicated to Lord Shiva. Cambodia is filled with temples dedicated to Shiva. Who can forget Prambanan, the amazing archaeological achievements of Java, amazing temples. Recently, by a group of Hindus, one of whom is my friend, Prabhu Dharmayasa. He worked tremendously to make it acceptable to the Indonesian government to start daily worship in these temples, and now worship has started there. Indonesia, most of Indonesia was completely Shaiva in nature. Also, I think the first translation of the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali into any non-Indian language prepared in ancient Javanese in the 7th century. It's as a dialogue between Lord Shiva and his son Kumara Kartikeya, prepared in Java, which translates most of the sutras of the first 3 chapters of the Yoga Sutras of sage Patanjali, Dharma Patanjala. So like this, and I think even the greatest empire of Indonesia, Majapahit Empire, which ruled from over an area starting from Sumatra up to Philippines. The very name of the name of this empire, the bitter Bilva. Bilva is the sacred fruit to Lord Shiva, of which we have trees all around, even where I live in the forest, a little bit further up. And I somehow feel that place is very special. It has an ancient ruin there of some hermitage, just a little bit further up. Yes, I go up there. To me, it seems like an ancient ruin of a hermitage, and a complete forest of these trees. All of them, most of them are these trees, and elsewhere in the forest they are not found. So somebody must have actually planted them, maybe a few hundred years ago up there. It's the whole area, just one small little area deep in the forest, completely filled with this Bilva tree, sacred to Lord Shiva, because it has these 3, I always speak of these 3 leaves, three leaves, but on one stem. And this is deeply symbolical also for the teachings of the Upanishads. So they have a similar fruit in Java and in Bali, which looks very similar. I think it is called wood apple in English. Wood apple, because it's like an apple, but from outside it's really the shell is very, very hard. And it's sacred to Lord Shiva. They have a Javanese version of that tree and fruit, but while in India that fruit is very sweet and you can actually eat it. In summer we make juice out of it here in Rishikesh, and everybody drinks it because it's very cooling. But there the same fruit is extremely bitter, very bitter. So they consider it sacred, they worship it, but it cannot be eaten there because it is totally bitter. And this is the name of this empire, the great bitter Bilva fruit empire, which once upon a time stretched upon not only the entire Indonesia, but Malaysia, Brunei, southern Thailand, Philippines, Cambodia, etc. Over many countries. Even when I was exploring a little bit the mythologies of Japan and the worship traditions of Japan, I noticed that they have this very similar fire worship practice known as Goma. We call it Homa in Sanskrit. The Japanese, they call it Goma. And the primary deity there, Daikokuten, is simply a Buddhist version of Mahakala, which is again Lord Shiva. Like this, over the years, many times when I was exploring different traditions, I noticed Shiva in even I'm now not sure anymore, but I think it was when I was not actually reading, but just going through and looking at the most important ideas found in a text known as the Theurgia, the mysteries. Sorry. Are we ready? Okay. Yeah, so when I was going through this work by the Neoplatonist philosopher from Syria, Iamblichus, his work, the Theurgia, it interested me tremendously because it seemed to be the ancient Tantra practices of ancient Greece. The subtitle of the book is The Mysteries of the Egyptians, Chaldeans and Assyrians. There also very clearly Shivalinga, this sign of Shiva, has been very clearly mentioned. Even when I look at the ancient ruins of the Arabic Peninsula, particularly the temple of Allat, the female counterpart of the pre-Islamic Allah, not the Islamic Allah, because the Islamic Allah does not have a counterpart, but the pre-Islamic Allah had a female counterpart who was known as Allat. And if you look at her temples, they have all the signs of goddess Parvati, the counterpart of Lord Shiva. Not the counterpart, how do you call it? The consort, not counterpart, sorry. The consort of Lord Shiva. The lion is always there. The lion is always there. Even I was very sad when that lion standing in front of the temple, her destroyed temple in Palmyra in Syria was recently destroyed by the IS. But then again, I read that it was again reconstructed. In any case, just to show a little bit that the personal deity that this Śvetāśvatara Upanishad is has mentioned, somehow had an appeal to meditative practitioners. Because again, theurgy, even in the way it is explained in Greek philosophy, it is a method, like Tantra, it is a method of union with one's deity, with the object of one's worship, a method. And the same thing which is there in Tantra, really you could say the word, you could use the word yoga in this context, because that is what yoga means, union. And I think the word that they use in Greek is henosis, which also simply means union, oneness, unity. And so the very purpose of theurgy was this henosis, this unity, oneness, acquiring oneness with the object of one's meditation. And that's why it was not only external rituals, but it was at the same time deeply internal meditative practices. So wherever meditative practices arose, symbols similar to Shiva can be found in different parts of the world. Later on with Buddhism, somehow the Buddha's meditative symbol replaced it, but masters throughout these regions always repeatedly pointed out that it seems that the Buddha and Shiva, they seem so different from each other, but the essence is always the same. And one of such saying has in fact become the national motto of Indonesia today. Wherever you see the government insignia, you will see written Bhinneka Tungaleka, seemingly apparent, united in essence, which was originally spoken by a Buddhist master from the 14th century from Java, Mpu Tantular, who said it in the context of Lord Shiva and Lord Buddha, seemingly different, but one in essence. What they symbolize, what they stand for, is completely the same. Last time at the end of the class, I was also asked this question by my friend. What's your name? Zof, okay, thank you. About this relationship between Tirumula's teaching, sage Tirumula's teachings, the Tirumandiram, with Śvetāśvatara Upanishad, particularly in the historical context. But as I said on that day also, somehow, and it is strange, even though it's the same country, there is tremendous ignorance in the north of the southern devotional traditions, and I'm a victim of that ignorance too. And this is amazing. The more I think about it, it is really amazing, because some of the greatest masters, the most influential masters that had the most influence on North India, Shankaracharya, Ramanujacharya, Madhvacharya, Vallabhacharya, Nimbarkacharya, all these great acharyas, they were South Indians, and they had tremendous influence on the north. Shankaracharya is the most influential figure here in Rishikesh, and he was from Kerala. Ramanujacharya, the second most influential one, from Tamil Nadu, and yet somehow we have failed to explore, and we even don't talk so much about these beautiful devotional traditions of South India. And why I'm saying this, that due to this, despite this ignorance, I tried to look for the answer in my reference works. It is quite controversial, the dating and the timing, but most scholars, at least the ones that I saw yesterday and today, they seem to put Tirumandiram to 7th, 8th century, because most of the Nayanar, 63 Nayanara saints, they started from the 5th or I think the 6th century, which makes it a later work than even, because you asked in the context of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. Patanjali's Yoga Sutras were composed maybe around 200, 300 AD, even though Patanjali was most likely 200 BC himself. It certainly makes it modern than the Shvetashvatara Upanishad. But this is only the scholars that I have consulted. There might certainly be different views also, but this is the ones that I. So Patanjali clearly seems more ancient. Somehow Patanjali has some influence in the south. I remembered later on that, in fact, this famous statue of Patanjali comes from that famous temple of Chidambaram, Lord Shiva, where he is, in fact, worshipping Lord Shiva there. So the only statues that we have of sage Patanjali are, in fact, from South India. So this will certainly inspire me to learn Tamil one day, hopefully, and explore the South Indian Shiva and also Vaishnava traditions of because devotion really as a practice started in the south and then inundated the rest of the country in the second millennium. It started in the first millennium, and again, devotion is an idea that has been very prominently mentioned in Shvetashvatara Upanishad, but it started as a very powerful social movement, specifically, first of all, with the Nayanars that you were mentioning, the 63 hounds of Shiva, as sometimes the word is translated, and then also the later Alvars, the Vaishnava saints, the 12 Alvars, which had males and female saints as a social movement, and then it went into the rest of the country, that the whole country was completely inundated by devotional traditions and gave rise to great saints in every corner of this country, every corner of this country, to such an extent that if you would have asked a common person in the last 1,000 years, what is yoga for you? And even if you ask the same question to a traditional person today, what is yoga to you? The most likely answer that you might get is devotion, bhakti, supreme love. In the same way, like out of India, and now in modern India too, if you ask somebody what is yoga, then they would say asanas, yogic postures. Both are a very limited description of yoga, because yoga is far vast than both descriptions. My point was simply to show that this was the most popular form of yoga. Today we equate asanas with yoga because that's the most popular form of yoga. In the same way, in the last 1,000 years, bhakti, supreme love, was equated with yoga because that was the most popular form of yoga. Which again, the first time this idea is mentioned, it is mentioned in this Upanishad, as we will see, as I will describe the philosophy of this Upanishad a little bit more. So after having talked about this personal deity in the third chapter, and then the fourth chapter really internalizes that deity. So it's not a deity out there, but it is really, it is used as a symbol of something, a nameless, a formless essence that has to be found and discovered by using that external symbol of that deity. That has been always the approach of all the mystical meditative traditions, where symbols are simply used as external symbols are used to express something that, and the masters have gone to the extremes. If you look at some of the Tantra texts, they have gone to the extremes. They have used virtually everything as a symbol to meditate upon the sometimes very provocative symbols. Sometimes very provocative symbols have also been used. So this use of symbols, because the reason is usually, even in the Upanishads, the reason is given that as we start meditating, our mind is so conditioned by names and forms that initially it is helpful to have a name and form before entering and preparing the mind to be comfortable with the nameless and the formless essence within. So the fourth chapter internalizes that, and the fifth chapter continues the discussion by discussing liberation. Liberation from the limitations of the mind. This human mind which limits the consciousness to this body, and with that limits the human consciousness to its upbringing, to its society, to its social upbringing. And really, this limitation, the other word for this limitation would be conditioning, that it gets completely conditioned. To free it from this, the Sanskrit word for such conditioning is upadhi. Upadhi simply means to place something close. And the idea is that if, for example, if you have a crystal, a very transparently clean crystal, and you place it close to a red surface or a black surface or a blue surface, it assumes the hue, the color of that surface. Even though itself it is transparently clean, it seems black when it comes in contact with the black surface. It seems red when it comes in contact with the red surface. It seems yellow when it comes. Usually the example is given of Japa Kusuma, the Chinese rose, which is very, very red. And if you put the crystal next to this Chinese rose, then the crystal starts. In Sanskrit, it is called Japa Kusuma. And when you place the crystal close to it, it also becomes red. So that's how conditioning works. Upadhi is also what limits. So for example, if you have an iron ball and you put it in fire and you allow it to really become glowing and then take it out, what it has done, that iron ball, the upadhi, limits the light and the warmth and gives it a form, gives it its form. You see the point? See, it is round, so then the light you see coming out from that glowing iron ball is also round. It's red, round red. The same form of the iron ball gets imposed on the light emanating, radiating, the light and the heat radiating out of that iron ball. That is what conditioning does. It becomes inseparably infused, and then it seems limited. The same thing in the understanding of these masters in meditation. The same thing happens also to human consciousness. And then it starts considering itself limited, conditioned. It becomes conditioned. And the idea always is to break that conditioning. Even the extreme measures that some of the Tantra masters have taken, really extreme measures. For example, recently I was going through a text, a very provocative text from the medieval Vajrayana tradition, He Vajra Tantra, highly respected. But there the Buddha really gives the opposite teaching. Now the new teaching is very different. It is kill animals, steal, speak lies, frequent others' wives. And then all the bodhisattvas and the Buddhas listening to him, they faint collectively. That's the story there. They faint collectively when they hear this teaching. And then he revives them and explains to them what these symbols really stand for. And that is when. So many traditions have used such provocative, really provocative, which was also socially very provocative to a particular highly respectful groups of people, to provoke them a little bit, and to provoke their listeners. to a little bit come out of these limitations, these frameworks. So the masters, that is upaya kaushalya, the skill of means, where you know your people to whom you are talking and how to awaken them a little bit. So my point was that many traditions take these symbols to the extreme, but all traditions make use of symbols. Even if you get rid of all the statues, I think there is no spiritual tradition in India, in the world, which does not, even if it's just an empty cross without Jesus Christ, if it's just a cross, it is still a symbol. Even if there is no statue, if you have just pictures of the Kaaba in Mecca in your room, it is still a symbol. So symbols are there. They are essential part of the mystical experiences. There is a tendency of the human mind to get attached to the symbols, and that is what some of the great prophets have tried to break through. And that is why even many traditions in India, they create statues and then they are destroyed. Some statues have to be destroyed after 9 days, some statues have to be destroyed after 12 years, but traditionally such statues they too are ultimately impermanent. Even these symbols ultimately, they are impermanent. In Bali, all the temples have to be changed after a few years. All the temples have to be changed. All the construction has to be changed. Nothing is continuous. Nothing is permanent. So, in the 5th chapter, this text then speaks about liberation through awareness, through becoming aware of one's limitations. That is what these Upanishads refer to, the experience of the true nature of the self, experiencing the real nature of the self, which is seen as a method of liberation, to explore oneself and to experience the true nature, the limitless, blissful nature of oneself. The 5th chapter is about that, which is again a common theme of all the Upanishads. And something very interesting then occurs, that this master then explores the possibility of being aware of this principle in the moments of death and dying in total awareness as a result of one's practice of this meditative practice throughout their lives. As a result of that, so he really speaks about, then he gets into this discussion of being aware, remaining aware of this principle in the moments of death. So this again shows that this quite common practice found in the yogic traditions, where falling asleep with awareness, not forgetting that even what is now known as lucid dreaming and lucid deep sleep, remaining aware while a person is dreaming, remaining aware while a person enters deep sleep and is in deep sleep. In the same way, these practices eventually help a person to leave the body in retaining awareness within oneself. And the yogic traditions do claim that the mastering of this technique means that consciousness leaves the body very, very gradually, which means that many yogis, at least this is the belief, that many yogis take days to, it takes days for their body to become completely cold. Even, for example, I think it's quite well documented that in the case of Aurobindo, one of the greatest masters of yoga, in the modern times in India. Aurobindo, well known, after he passed away, his body remained warm for 72 hours or something like this after he passed away. So he was totally clinically dead, but still his body remained warm. And I think this is insignificant if you compare to what the Tibetan traditions tell us, where this practice is, I think, known as, correct me please if the pronunciation is not correct, Thukdam, yes. Even the New Zealand television made a documentary on a Tibetan Buddhist saint who left his body in New Zealand and remained warm and really supple. There was no stiffness in the body for, I think, around 1 month, the whole month, for 1 month. And of course, you always have skeptics. Skeptics come up with explanations, but this is not something that we usually always see. Some skeptics say, well, it's Tibet as well as New Zealand is a cold country, and in a cold country things can get easily preserved. And so one modern philosopher in his book Waking, Dreaming and Being, Ivan Thompson, he has really looked into these the results of these clinical studies. And the most interesting one, my access to these clinical studies is only through that book. And it is said that the most interesting one, which was supposed to had happened in South India, and where medical scholars were specifically sent by the Dalai Lama to document the Thukdam in South India, the results were not available to him by that time. So if the results, maybe now they are out, but I don't know where to look for them, but it would be very interesting, because that would really show that even in warm temperature in South India and humid temperature, if really somebody could keep his body warm for extended period of time, forget about 15 days or 1 month, even just 2-3 days would be a great achievement. So, but this practice has been there, and as is often the case when it comes to the practical teachings, I think the Tibetan Buddhist masters are the ones who have been able to retain the very practical teachings, and that is amazing. And this might come as a surprise to some, but sadly, India was constantly attacked, so much has been destroyed, and in this destruction somehow many of the practical teachings were totally forgotten. But the Tibetan Buddhist masters really have been able to, to my knowledge, they are most likely the only ones that have been really able to preserve these deeper yogic teachings in their practical methods into the modern times. And even the yoga practice that you are practicing today, this Iyengar yoga, if you go a little bit into its history, Krishnamacharya, yes, Krishnamacharya, the teacher of BKS Iyengar Guruji, when he was studying in Banaras, the city of knowledge, he asked the same question that I had asked many times my teachers when I came across such references. The 8th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita is all about Thukdam, about this, how to leave your body. But then when we asked our teachers, where are the practical steps? They say, sadly, they have been forgotten. And they have been forgotten. But the same question was asked by Krishnamacharya. I'm reading so much about the Yoga Sutras, so much scholarship, but where are the practical steps? Then it is said that one of his teachers told him that he should go beyond Muktinath into the Tibetan region and meet a brahmachari, I forgot now a name, who was living up there in a cave, to whom he was sent to learn the practical yogic teachings, from whom then he learnt the practical yogic teachings, and then they were revived again. Recently I read, in BBC I read that there was a very interesting, collection of pictures shown of yogic postures from within the Potala palace. So, or if not the Potala palace, then one of the ancient temples in Lhasa, which has mural paintings of different yogic postures. So yoga was very much part. There is a beautiful documentary also, I think on YouTube, which is worthy to be seen, the Yoga of Tibet, or the Tibetan yogis, or the Yoga of Tibetan Buddhism, something like this. A very, very interesting documentary which explores the yogic traditions of Tibetan Buddhism. Okay, just to point the direction a little bit. Then that union, that unity that I was talking about earlier in the context of theurgia in the Greek traditions, the same idea also is expressed here in the Upanishad, in this Upanishad also. The external signs of becoming one. What does it mean to become one with the object of one's worship, with the deity? What to become? To be, because the deity is seen as a radiant being, and this means that the individual also starts to lead his life like a radiant being, which in very concrete terms, in real life, what does it really mean is that if you go back to the Mahabharata, then it says that such a person does not commit any evil in thoughts, words, and deeds towards any living being. Neither does he frighten anyone, nor does he get frightened by anyone. Neither there is any selfish desire, and there is total freedom from hatred. This is in concrete terms, this is what it means to become one and united with the deity. That idea of samasthiti, which we have in Tadasana, standing balanced. This is what it means to become totally balanced in one's life. Equal, equanimity, sama, the very definition of yoga provided by Krishna. What is yoga? Yoga is equanimity, to become equal. That is how the idea is presented. It is also in this context that this Upanishad pays its respect to sage Kapila. And so it is the first Upanishad that refers to the first master revered by the yogic traditions as the first human master of yoga. Today we refer to, it's in fact wrong to refer to sage Patanjali as the father of yoga. He simply is the author of the surviving text of, the first surviving text of yoga. The true father of yoga is sage Kapila, whose time we don't know, but modern historians believe that his philosophical system known as Sankhya has its origins in 900 BC, so he would have lived approximately at that time, or even could have been more ancient than that. No idea. But he's mentioned here in this Śvetāśvatara Upanishad. Then the sixth and the last chapter talks about devotion, talks about love, talks about the key theme in the sixth chapter is bhakti. Bhakti, which is translated as devotion into English, but literally it simply means supreme love. That's the word, literally what the word means. So, and the hallmark, is that the correct word? Yes, the hallmark of bhakti, which is to take refuge. That also, to take refuge, is the same word which is also used by the Buddha. Buddham sharanam gacchami, to take refuge in the Buddha, to take refuge in his teachings and is in his community. The same word has also been used here, sharana, in the 6th chapter. Devotion, love, and taking refuge. That's the expression of that. And here, however, when he talks about taking refuge, he does not talk about taking refuge in something external, but in the light that enlightens the human intellect. The human intellect which works as a tool to comprehend the world out there, the light of consciousness, which enlightens it. We studied this mantra from Shvetashvatara Upanishad when we were studying the 10 Shanti mantras. The last one was this, Atma Buddhi Prakasham. The prakasha, the light which enlightens the human intellect. I take refuge in that because I want to free myself from the limitations and the conditionings of the intellect and the mind. That's why I'm taking. So what devotion, what supreme love simply means, total dedication to explore that. To explore that deepest mystery of human experience, of human existence. Everything else that we will explore within our human experience will be an object of that consciousness. And in this, we are exploring the mystery of that which explores all mysteries. We are taking refuge in that. So this is how this text really is the first text to very clearly mention bhakti, devotion, dedication, total commitment, and taking refuge. Taking refuge has also this idea of suffering. When a person is suffering tremendously, then we seek a refuge. So the idea here is not to seek refuge in anything external, but to seek refuge in one's internal, limitless essence. So this is how the idea of bhakti was evolved, which then, as I showed, has become extremely influential in India over the last. So this just to show how this collection of teaching known as Śvetāśvatara Upanishad has been so influential. It has tremendous. That's why, because the difference between the Yoga Sutras and the Bhagavad Gita, even though both texts are on yoga, the Bhagavad Gita has a lot more emphasis on a personal deity and on devotion, which is mentioned in the Yoga Sutras, but is not the central theme. In the Bhagavad Gita, it becomes a little bit like a central theme, and I think that is again a sign of influence of Śvetāśvatara Upanishad on the Bhagavad Gita. Like this, so many ideas. It concludes the 6th chapter and the last chapter by stating that this radiant being in which we take refuge is to be searched and found within the chitta. Chitta, which means within the mind. The same word that Patanjali uses as a definition of yoga to pacify the chitta, the mind. So it has to be searched for that. It is the very essence of all beings, and it is the very source of inner bliss, inner happiness, calmness, peace. A person in that state becomes totally calm and peaceful in nature. So with this, I think I have been able to present the whole teachings of Shvetashvatara Upanishad in a nutshell, what is being described in the 6th chapter. And these teachings, particularly many yoga therapists in the West, when they try to address anxieties, worries, depression, when they ask their students to welcome their symptoms of anxiety as messengers and recognize them, ask them to recognize them as changing sensations. These anxieties, these worries, they are not something permanent. They are changing, they are constantly changing. And then to go deeper into that which underlies that unchanging essence behind all those changing phenomena, which they have found. There are interesting, particularly as I was going through this interesting book, Yoga in Healthcare, by many authors, written together by authors from a medical background, from a yoga philosophy background, as well as yoga practice background. So scholars, I think it's one of the best works really to explore yoga, in the philosophy and practices of yoga in healthcare, something like this. It's a very interesting, quite a thick book. Now, seeing that how these teachings of, first of all, acknowledging that our anxieties and worries are fleeting, impermanent in nature, and then there is a deeper essence that can be explored, really helps alleviating symptoms of anxiety. It was very interesting for me to look. Śvetāśvatara Upanishad, the 6th chapter, is about that. So, still have a few minutes if there are any quick questions. Yes?
When friend asked me what is Sanskrit word for laugh, she wants to make a tattoo.
Yes.
So I'm thinking if I can...
She wants to make? Okay. I have stopped answering such questions whenever somebody sends me, because I think since 2004, I have been getting emails asking me, I want to make a tattoo. Please give me the Sanskrit word for this and this. And initially I gave it for 1 or 2 years, and then I said, find your tattoos for yourself. But still, since the question has been asked, so prema is the Sanskrit word for love, and intense, if you would say intense love, then it is bhakti, that word, yes. So, let it be better a tattoo on the heart than on the body. Physical tattoos can be forgotten, so a tattoo on the heart. Oh, okay. Yoga is all about having tattoos on your mind, on your heart. Good tattoos, beautiful tattoos. Nice definition. Yes. Any other? That's it. Okay. So next time we will now, with this background in our mind, we will start learning the first question of the students to the master. Okay? So let us conclude. Oh. सर्वे भवन्तु सुखिनः सर्वे सन्तु निरामयाः सर्वे भद्राणि पश्यन्तु मा कश्चित् दुःखभाग् भवेत् ॐ शान्तिः शान्तिः शान्तिः. My humble salutations to you. Thank you very much.